What would you say if you were like, you know what, if I could go back, I wish I would have done this one a little bit differently?
One is a specific, mistake.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Candy Valentino Show. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending this time as we get to share probably one of my favorite interviews that I have had from an entrepreneur and investor. I cannot wait for you to listen to this podcast episode with Eddie Wilson. He is dubbed the King of Exits, and make no mistake that title is actually well deserved, as he has accomplished over 100 exits in his career. He has co-founded numerous companies, has a private equity firm, and does so much to help entrepreneurs in their journey to growth, scale, and eventually exit their companies. I personally genuinely love this conversation. I feel like I forgot that you guys were even listening into this, but we really dive deep into what it takes to create a viable company, what it takes to really scale a company, and then how to create a succession plan for that company so that you have the greatest chance to exit and get paid on that asset. We also talked about specifically what he feels is going to happen in this year due to the election, as well as some other shifts that we're seeing in the market as it relates to real estate and business. He's an entrepreneur, he's a businessman, he's an investor, speaker, philanthropist. His bio is a mile long. We're going to link how you can find out more from him because I know you'll want to. But without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Eddie Wilson. And thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And we were talking off camera, and I want to unpack a little bit of what's going on before we really start to get in all of the exits and everything that you've done in your career, which has been phenomenal. But we've got a couple things going on right now. We're in the second quarter of the year. Mm-hmm. We're coming into an election year. Right. We've just had the horrific event that you want to call it, the Baltimore Bridge collapse. Sure. I'm curious of what your thoughts are on how an election year, if we start there, affects business, real estate, investments, interest rates. What are your kind of thoughts on all of that?
An election year always has an effect, right? And it's just trying to determine and get ahead of what actually is going to happen. I believe this year, because the Federal Reserve has kind of held this position, where they're trying to stave off inflation. They're kind of holding their position, but they've also kind of let us know that potentially the drop's coming. And I feel like they've baited us for so long that they're like, it's like a pent-up emotion. It's like once it finally comes out, it just comes out, and it comes out in a very demonstrative way. And I think that's what's going to happen, but I believe that's really going to impact the real estate market. Right now you have less than 2.5 months of inventory on the market, right? And really a healthy economy should have 5 to 6 months worth of inventory. We're 2.5 to 3 million homes underbuilt in America right now. And so because of the high interest rates, a lot of people that maybe could buy or should buy have held off buying. But the moment those interest rates drop, I believe that it actually changes the dynamic of our economy. And I think that, this isn't a political statement, but I do believe that it is intentional. It is being manipulated for the fact that if all of a sudden, it's like when gas prices are high, everybody's like, oh my goodness, gas prices are high. And then when it's low, it's like, oh, things are great. This is amazing. Life is good. It's like the American people are they're like a thermometer that sucks up the small little pieces like interest rates. And, like the reality of it is you've been in real estate. I've been in real estate. I'm big into real estate. You can make money in any real estate market. I can make money right now today with interest rates. And I am, I'm building houses right now in South Florida and buying apartment complexes. But I think what's going to happen is that action's going to happen. I believe that then the follow-on, happens, and then you have less inventory available, which drives up even more demand, less supply, and then it's going to give this euphoric feeling like, oh, everything is great. Like, look at how robust the housing economy is. Like, look at the jobs market is robust and solid, and consumer spending will hopefully go up. But I do, the unfortunate thing is I think oftentimes our economy is the playground of those that are manipulating it for their own good, right? Yeah. And I think that whoever manipulates it for their own good does receive a value out of it.
It's almost like most of the American people have a very short attention span.
Very short.
Of what's happened, and they're just focusing on right now. Right. So when we were studying, I did an interview with, I think it was Trump's Economic Council president, and he was saying that every single 4 years, no matter who's in office, interest rates always come down.
They always do.
And it's just fascinating to me that like these, as people are saying about housing prices right now, but it's probably the best that we're going to see in quite
I
some
think
time.
so.
Do you agree?
I agree. I think housing prices are going to go through the roof, personally. And we've really bet heavy on markets like Jacksonville and these like tertiary markets of really solid states that we know the prices are still relatively low, because I believe that wherever there's inventory and wherever there is a low barrier of entry, it's going to be absorbed immediately when interest rates go down.
Why do you think areas like Jacksonville are faring better, and why would you build there as opposed to, say, Phoenix or LA or another area?
I think Phoenix has had its opportunity. Phoenix is such a hot marketplace, but the barrier to entry into Phoenix is you're spending $500,000-$600,000 on an entry level home. In Jacksonville, Florida, it's $125,000, $130,000. You can still buy a home that's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, a starter family home in the $100,000. Like where else is that going to be found? And you have thousands of people moving in from New York and New Jersey into Florida. And so because of that, it's like those markets will absorb, I believe, the greatest increase in value. And I think that all of a sudden you'll see prices go crazy. Kind of test case is Tampa, Florida was very similar to this in 2010 through 2013. So you had the recession happen. You had pricing that was extremely low. You had a bunch of flight into Florida after the recession. And now the average, home price in Tampa is, in the $600,000 range. I think Jacksonville will go there very soon. And it's kind of the last frontier of Florida. Orlando's had it, Tampa's had it, Miami's had it, Fort Lauderdale's had it. Fort Myers, Cape Coral, where I build at still today, has had it. And Jacksonville is still a sleepy market. It's very big, lots of opportunity. And I think there are markets like that in Texas. I think there are markets like that in Arizona, but the big Class A markets have really already seen a lot of that massive increase kind of post-recession 2010.
I love that. It's making me want to look into Jacksonville.
Yeah, don't do too much, because I'm buying a lot there. Yeah. I don't want too much competition.
Well, it's interesting too. So we've got that dynamic with the election year. We've got the dynamic with Ukraine. We've got war. We've got inflation at all-time high. We now have this Baltimore Bridge collapse. With what with e-commerce and business and how many just different diverse businesses that you've been in, do you think that it's one bridge? Do you think something like that will also shift what's going on in business right now?
Yeah, I think that it always shifts. I think big things like that always cause a shift in business. Now, if it comes out that there was some terrorist activity or there was something and it causes fear has a different reaction inside of the business owner or the business consumer. If it's just, this was just something poor that happened, it was a mistake, obviously I think it's going to impact Baltimore and the surrounding area. We saw it in Atlanta. We had a bridge collapse back during COVID. There was a fire and a bridge collapsed. And all the businesses in that surrounding area really did suffer, because they're so used to heavy foot traffic in those high urban areas to survive. And all of a sudden you remove all that foot traffic, the foot traffic goes somewhere else and they suffer. If it's something that is related to terror and it's fear related, that's totally different, because then it plays on the psyche of the consumer. Consumer spending goes down when they're afraid, right? The confused mind says no, but also the afraid mind says no. And so when we fear, oftentimes it shows up in our checkbook. It shows up in our spending. But you're so right. It's funny. You could have an act of terror, and 2 weeks later, gas prices go from $4 to $1.50, and the American population completely forgets about it. Our consumer spending is as fickle as the news cycle, right? It's like the next big story comes out and we move on and move away from it.
It's so fascinating that really the media has that much control, which is, I think, why it's so important for entrepreneurs to get good information from good people that have done it, whether that's being at events like you have, listening to podcasts like ours. I think it's really important. And I want to tee into, obviously, your story, because you are kind of known, when we did some research on you, as the king of exits. You've done over 85, 100?
Yeah, we're well over 100 now. But who's counting it at some point? It's just a lot.
So you're building these companies specifically to exit.
Sure.
Can you unpack? I think this is a huge thing that's missed by entrepreneurs. I think that they want to grow their business, and they aren't intentional about an exit. And I think if you're not intentional from the beginning, you're going to have a really hard time acquiring 100%. A buyer at some point. Yeah. So can you maybe share from your perspective, doing this so many times, what does an entrepreneur need to do now, even
Sure.
if in their first 7 figures,
Mhm.
in order to have an opportunity to exit later?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great question. And I 100% agree with you. I believe that there's 5 phases of business. Those 5 phases of business, and this is kind of the proprietary way of how I think, right? I have a system called Empire that we, put our businesses through. But the 5 phases are startup, and I start companies very intentionally. Now, I'm typically not starting companies out of, the 27 companies we own currently. I think we've started maybe 10 of them, but because acquisition is such a better strategy for me.
Yes.
Let somebody else get the mistakes out of the way, get the right people on them, and then you can see what you're working with. And but there's startup, and that to me that's a predetermined amount of time and a predetermined amount of money. I set money aside. We decide if we're succeeding or failing, and then we move on if we don't succeed. The next phase is where all small businesses in America live, in perseverance. This is where they kind of look profitable. They can make their QuickBooks, kind of adjust to the point where it makes them feel good. But the reality of it is they're not paying themselves a commensurate rate for what they do. They can't go on vacation. They've got single points of failure. They don't have the right people in the right seats. They got their aunt that's their CFO that really has no, QuickBooks, past, and they got their cousin that's a sales rep for them, and they're kind of promising the future to them, but because they're building it on a lack of knowledge and a lack of skill and education, they're probably never going to get there, right? The next phase we call viability, and we push hard to get ours into viability. For me, I don't run like a venture capital firm. I don't just throw money at opportunity hoping I'll get there. I'm very intentional, and I don't spend a ton of money in marketing until I get into viability, right? Like I'm going to create a kind of a floor of viability, right people, right seats, right capital, right product, right service. And then once it's sustainable, I'm going to pour gas on that fire, and I'm going to go into the 4th phase, which is scale. Most people make the mistake trying to go from perseverance into scale. Ooh, I had a really good month, so therefore I'm going to go buy a bunch more product. I'm going to market a lot, and I'm going to go.
Yes.
And they miss the place that they don't have the right people, they don't have the right systems and processes. And so for me, I believe one of the biggest misnomers in business is that you should grow slow. I think that it takes a while to get to viability. Once you're at viability, you should ride the momentum of business and commerce and everything around you. Then you move into the last phase, which is succession. Succession is, what do I do with my business once it hits its peak? But with the thing that makes us unique is when we go from viability from perseverance into viability, we put a heavy focus on succession right then. So we don't believe our businesses are viable until they're truly ready to get to the place where they could be sold, right? So then you're looking at typically 3 levers. Your first lever is typically EBITDA, or it's your bottom line. Your second lever is typically IP. What do I do uniquely different than everyone else, whether it's technology or, how I process data? And third, what's my operating system? If I sold it to someone, can it still operate at the same efficacy as if I'm running it right now myself, right? So we kind of build that in, and that's what small businesses need to focus on, is as they're moving into viability, and their focus should be viability, not scale. Viability, then once you're settled, then scale. When they move into viability, they should also have all of the succession planning currently done, right? What are my goals for exit? What am I trying to build towards? Because they make a bunch of mistakes when they go from viability into scale that ultimately hurt them in succession.
How can they know the difference?
Yeah, so it's a big difference. And here, like for instance, a lot of people will build. We talked about SaaS products. I'm a big fan of SaaS products because of the multiple you get on the exit. I get into perseverance, and then I have to decide, where do I put my money? Because it's always limited in resource. So do I put it into people? Do I put it into developing my product? Do I put it into technology? And so when we get into viability, we should have all levels of kind of viability need to be had, which is the right people in the right seats. You have to have the people. Now, they can still wear multiple hats, and you can still be spread thin. You don't have to necessarily have one person in every seat. You have to have enough capital that you can weather a rainy day, right? Like you can't be on the verge of failure every day, or you're truly not in viability. Number 3, you have to have products and services that are sustainable over time, Then if I have extra resources, then I should be building technology that potentially can give me a better exit, because that's where IP comes in, right? Like the best IP I can put into my business is typically technology.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get much greater returns. And so I always add a technology layer when I can afford it, but not until I can afford it,
Mm-hmm.
and not at the expense of my people or the expense of, suffering specific to like the capital I have. But I'm building, IP and technology together so that I'm creating more enterprise value along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to forego enterprise value for the sake of scale and creating more top line. Does that make sense?
That. Yeah, I think that's a great discernment for anyone listening, because I simplify it to growth and scale.
Sure.
But I think so many times they mess that up. A lot of newer entrepreneurs, I think they need to grow, or they're like, okay, well, I'm doing 3 million now. I need to hurry up and scale.
Right.
And it's like, but you're not viable. I love that word.
Right.
So I interrupted you because I wanted to unpack that. But when you go to the last and you said succession and you start to plan that at viability, tell me about the intentionality about doing that when you're just viable before you start scaling, and why you do it in that order.
I do it in that order because what happens is you have the tendency to grow the business towards the greatest opportunity versus the greatest value. For instance, we look at it and in scale. Let's say, we have a coffee company, and it's very easy to get hyper focused on the things that have the greatest growth potential. The greatest growth potential for us are retail stores. It's easy. You for $150,000 to $200,000, I'm popping up coffee shops everywhere. So you can look at that and go, well, man, that'd be great if we had 20 or 30 or 40 stores. And you kind of fool yourself into this is scale. The reality of it is if you actually look at what we do, we have proprietary roasts. We have 26 proprietary roasts. Where we actually have the greatest value in this business is the wholesale side, because we actually do something that no one else does. So it's easy as an entrepreneur to get so hyper focused on scale, but missing the right metrics, which is succession. What am I doing in creating more enterprise value? I may take the wrong road. That would be the difference in us growing this company for the next 3 to 4 years and probably selling. If I focused on the retail shops, I might be able to sell that company for 30 or 40 million. If I focus on the proprietary roast, Blue Bottle sold to Starbucks for 280 million. There's a massive swing, right? And so the reason I plan in viability, my succession plan, is ultimately I want to create enterprise value to create value in the end, which potentially gives me the chance to exit. And succession planning isn't always exiting the business. I exit my businesses, but a lot of people, that just means passing on to an heir or creating an ESOP or taking your company public. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go into succession.
So you're intentional about how you want to exit, but then you're also managing and looking at what the returns are going to be.
Correct.
For somebody that has a business now and doesn't have that acumen built, what are some of the things they can start to evaluate and know, like, okay, well, maybe this is possible and this is not for my business?
Yeah. First of all, they need to have some sort of an efficiency planning product or process, right? Like, is there a way to do more with less? Like, most people focus on productivity. How do I do more with the same? I believe that in order for you to scale and get the most value out of your company, you need to look at it as efficiency, which is doing more with less. What could I actually do today that provides me more profitability and more productivity, right? That's where technology comes in. That's where, all the different variances that automation, right? All that good stuff. And that's where most entrepreneurs are missing it, because they just throw more bodies, they throw more marketing, and they get bigger. But I call that linear growth. It's like my bottom line is increasing as much as my top line is increasing,
exactly.
Right? That's not scale.
That's growth.
Scale, that's just growth. And it could be exponential, right? Yeah. But scale is really when your bottom line is actually increasing slightly, but your top line is increasing exponentially. It's like that gap is just widening.
Yeah, it's like this as opposed to the same. Are there a few, no matter, and I know this is maybe a difficult conversation to have, but I'd love to talk about it because we talk a lot about data, KPIs, and metrics on the show, because I think it's really missed with a lot of entrepreneurs. And I know in so many different businesses, it's probably not the same, but are there a few correlation of metrics that you guys evaluate almost consistently across industries and markets?
There are. We use a methodology that actually was created by Six Sigma. And it's what's called a SIPOC, SIPOC. And what it does is it actually takes into consideration the life value or the life cycle of a customer. Right. So your S is the supply. Where do my clients come from? The I is then how do I actually interact with those clients to determine if they're qualified? My P is what they buy, the process. The O is the output. That's the fulfillment. how have I done with the fulfillment of that? And the C is, how does the customer interact or feel about the whole entire process, from they came in, they were qualified, they bought, something was delivered to them, and now they have a feeling about it, right? And so we actually have 7 data points, KPIs in there. Every time that changes from lead to qualified lead to purchase to delivery to how the customer feels, are all KPIs that universally ladder across every company. If I get into a company, there's 2 things I do. Number 1, I use a tool called Predictive Index. I like Predictive Index. There's a lot of those type of companies, Culture Index and various other ones. I Predictive Index every human, because human capital is so important in the business. And I do what's called a SIPOC exercise, and then I watch their KPIs over time specific to each one of those layers. There's a lot of different KPIs you can look at. And, we could get so deep into that. I think there's 3 types of KPIs: key process indicators, key performance indicators, key profit indicators. It's like you get so deep into that.
Yeah.
But to me, I want to really simplify it into 6 or 7 that I can look at, see how their growth is, and make sure that everything they're promising, that they have enough opportunity, and everything they're promising, they're delivering, and the customer's having a good experience with it.
Yeah, because I think one of the myths are that you touched on. People think if they just measure their KPIs, it's going to grow their business.
Sure.
But if you don't measure what matters,
Correct.
And if you overcomplicate it, there is no way, unless you have hundreds of employees and a lot of in-depth processes, that you could even measure all of the different ones that you just rattled off.
Yeah.
But I think everyone watching or listening right now, if you just pause here and go back and rewind to just what we've unpacked in these first 15, 20 minutes, I think there's so much value there that even if you're not at that level to understand it yet, you'll start to know what to pay attention to, which I think is massively valuable.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And I know people often watch super successful people and they're like, well, but I can't do that. I don't know what he knows. Have there been any, hundreds of businesses, all the things that you've done, have there been any challenges or any mistakes that maybe you've made along the way?
Absolutely.
What would you say if you were like, you know what, if I could go back, I wish I would have done this one a little bit differently?
I put so much emphasis in my early days on education or being around the right people. And, I think that most people feel like they have this ceiling, or they're trapped, they're a small business owner, and they just don't know how to get there. And they look around, they go, oh, well, you've got an MBA, or you've got, they put these milestones, and they all they do is they put something out in front of them that they're not going to achieve. And so they think, okay, that limits me from getting there. The reality of it is I could give you what I learned in my MBA in probably 15 minutes, and you wouldn't be any better for it, and you wouldn't grow your business anymore, right? I could put you in the same room that I'm in, that you and I are in oftentimes, with some of the highest level business minds that I know of, and it's not gonna help them be successful either. For me, what's gonna help them be successful is knowing 2 things. If they really know their people and they know their numbers, right? That's where you find all the success in business. For me, if I go back, there are really 2 big mistakes I made. One is a specific, mistake, which was I didn't understand the game of exiting. In my first exit, I was taken advantage of in a massive way. Kind of these Wall Street tycoons worked me through this process, and I get there and they put me under pressure, and I didn't know what to do, and I was forced into a sale that probably left $30 million on the table. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not going to do this way anymore.
It happens though, right? That was your first one.
First one.
It happens all the time because you don't know what you don't know.
You don't.
And I think sometimes too, when you're not so intentional and you don't have the data to fall back on your experience, you're just like, I want to get this done.
Right.
At any cost.
At any cost. And really what it was, it's a long story. I'll do it very quickly, but I literally needed capital for growth. And I had an advertising agency. I landed a big contract. And in advertising, you have to hold that capital for 30, 60, 90 days. Well, it was a $30 million contract. Well, our total top line is in the 20 millions. So how do I come up with 30 million, and really it was based on a quarterly output. But so I started trying to source capital. I have this contract, so I should be able to go get capital. And somebody offered capital, took me all the way up to the last minute. And I thought we were going to the table to sign. I sit down, 4 guys sitting across the table from me, and they said, hey, here's the deal. Everything that you thought was going to happen today is not going to happen. We are actually your biggest competitor. You missed one mistake, that you forgot to ask who's sourcing your capital. And I'm looking at my broker going, I thought you were going to ask that question. You're like, why? How was I supposed to ask that question? They're like, we're going to acquire you, and you have the choice. Well, my back was against the wall. I'd signed a contract. I thought I was going to have the capital, and it was either capsize the whole business or take the exit. And so it felt like these corporate raiders were sitting across from me,
This is
just
like
like,
billions shit that you see like on
yeah, I
Netflix
know,
is what this sounds like. Where they have your back. You have no choice.
You have no choice.
Or you're going to just walk away from however long, 18, 24 months probably
Right.
to get to the signing table.
So it took forever. And I drove, they gave me 24 hours to think about it. It was very kind of them.
Oh
and
my gosh.
I went home and I was driving back in the morning, really had no choice, but I was so mad in the beginning. It was like, I'll show you, I'll go get my lawyer out. And they just like very calmly were like, okay, we've done this a lot. Like you haven't. So just, get it out of your system type thing. And so I came back in the morning and as I was kind of going back there, it dawned on me. I had these very emotionally intelligent parents that really helped me in life through loss. We had a couple of big losses in my life. And my mom would always say, if you find gratitude in the loss, like you can turn it into a catalyst for growth. And and so
advice.
It was amazing, right? I mean,
Great
so just such gratitude for my parents and who they've been in my life. But I was driving back that morning. I thought, what would I gain if I just gave myself to this? And I was earning a 7 times EBITDA, on the business, and it dawned on me. You know what? I was in my 20s, and I thought I actually get 7 years of my life back. If I think about it this way. If I did the exact same thing, let's just say my EBITDA is going to be my net and I never really grew past that point. Essentially what they did was they said, we'll give you 7 years worth of capital that you get to have today, or in the next 30 days and go live your life. And instead of waiting for the capital over 7 years, like, yeah, maybe I would have grown it. Maybe I could have got to my goals, but they gave me the gift of 7 years of my life back. And I thought, wow, I could actually go do something with this. So I actually found on the way to sign the papers like this, like gratitude of, they're actually doing me a favor. And instead of focusing on the loss, I focused on the opportunity. But that's what I would have done different. I would have understood the game before I walked in, And really, I think the reason they call me the king of exits today is because at that moment, as I sat across the table, even though I was grateful for the experience, grateful to have the capital, I said to myself, I'm going to understand this game like they do. I'm not playing this game anymore with people that, that understand it better than I do. So I'm going to figure this out.
Best teacher, isn't it?
It is. And so I walked out of there going, okay, how do I figure this out? I started making phone calls. I was like, somebody's got to know this. Well, very few people know this game very well. So it's been a lifetime journey to build it. Second thing I made mistakes at was not valuing my people. I was in my 20s and, there was a sense of like pride and arrogance in, when you're young, you just think like the world revolves around me. I brought this to the table and, and I really did a poor job at valuing my people. Now I look back and I look at every exit, I look at every company I've built, and it's always been dependent on people. Like the people are who got me there.
Yeah.
The people that help lead and run those companies and the people that have been with me for 10, 12, 15 years now, like they're the rock stars. Like I just get the privilege of leading them,
Yeah.
And so those are the 2 mistakes I've made, in my lifetime for sure that I would love to just go back and change it all.
Brother, the second one, I can't tell you how many times I think,
sure,
who even worked for me in my 20s?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Like the people that stuck through 15, 20 years, some employees, I'm like, there is no way that I was a great leader.
Right.
Like, I just wish same thing. I wish I could go back and just be even more grateful for them. But, we don't know what we don't know. But I want you to go back because you said something and I did not want to interrupt your thought. But you said something when you walked in. And when you realize what you were getting back in that moment, and you said do you even remember the phrase that you said? You said this really powerful phrase that instead of looking at what you lost, you start to evaluate what you gained. Has that really been a catalyst in the way that you've operated business and life from that point on?
100%. I have
because you just lost $30 million. I just want everyone to capture this. You thought you were going to be $30 million richer, and 24 hours later, you realize that that's gone. And one lesson that your mom gave came to you and you're like, I'm just going to see what I can gain. And you realize I got 7 years back.
Right.
Where has that gotten you? Because that has to have gotten you out of so many dark places.
It has. My parents are amazing people, both entrepreneurs, by the way, both own their own businesses, both have created their businesses. So I learned a lot of this by osmosis. My father, because of stepping away from kind of his corporate world and job and going into entrepreneurship, he gave me a healthy understanding of fear. How do I deal with the liability and the potential for loss? And when I was a kid, we had money sometimes and sometimes we had nothing, And I look back on those days because my dad was always present. And I think, what's the worst that can happen? I lose everything and I still get to spend time with my kids. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But what my mom gave me is I lost two siblings. I lost a sister when I was younger and a brother when I was older.
Wow.
And I really struggled with the loss of my sister when I was younger. And my
How old were you?
mom, so I was 6 years old and my sister was 4.
Wow.
And it was one of those things where she was going in for a procedure and she never came home. So it's just
Oh
like,
my
it was
gosh.
catastrophic loss, right? And I struggled. I mean, like, struggled with that loss. And I just remember, like, there were so many like dark nights and struggles and just the emptiness. And my mom, again, I said how emotionally intelligent she was. She would come to me, and you think about, like, she lost a child. I can't even imagine losing a child. You know, it's like losing a sister, losing a brother, that's hard. But losing a child, I can't imagine that today.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom, even though she lost a child, she would come to me and I would be struggling, I'd be crying, and she would say, hey, real quick, she would say, do you remember your sister's favorite toy? And I would sit there and say, yeah, I do remember. And she would say, what is it? And I'd explain it to her, and she'd say, tell me about it. Do you remember playing that with Rebecca? And then she would tell me about your favorite moment with Rebecca. Tell me about, and my mom would just constantly rehearse. And then what she was doing was she was building gratitude in me. And she would say, aren't you so happy that you had that time with her?
Gosh.
And she would just like pull that out of me, you know?
Wow.
And so it became the lesson from my mother that I learned my entire life. My brother died when I was 24, he was 18. And I got to practice the same experience, right? But what I learned is that in every loss in life, it's a catalyst or it's a ceiling. You know, there's so many things that we deal with in our subconscious mind as a business owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we've lost, we've won, and based on
sometimes
how many
within 5 minutes.
yeah, sometimes it's in the same day, and you know, all of that all those feelings build up, and we start telling ourselves we are that, right? Like, I am a winner at this, but I am a loser at this. I'm really bad at finances, but I'm really good at marketing. And it's like we kind of build this story, and then our subconscious mind kind of kicks in, and then it just kind of takes over, right? And then we start doing things without even thinking later. Those are the ceilings we put in our life. Losses oftentimes put people in a place where they begin to identify with the loss. I'm the guy who went bankrupt. I'm the guy who did this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the guy, I'm the girl. It's like, and we begin to identify with our losses. Or there's kind of a secondary path. And that is the path of gratitude in the loss. And I believe that gratitude in the loss actually is a catalyst to greatness. I believe it's like pouring gas on any fire. And so that morning, you think about it, it's like I could have been identified as the guy in my own mind that, you know, missed the greatest opportunity of my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I put all my life into this, and I literally missed my opportunity. I could have been that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But because of what my mother taught me driving into work that day, to sign those papers, she helped me identify that in my life. And I thought about the opportunity, and it became a catalyst. Now I've sold over 100 companies, and it's like, so even in telling you like it's the one thing I would do different, it's like I don't know that I really would do different, because it really was the catalyst to everything
Absolutely.
that I have today.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it is, if you can find gratitude in the loss, gratitude in the valley, it really becomes a catalyst that allows you to capture the game.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I think what's so fascinating too is if you would have had a different definition of that event, you would have then defined yourself, that created an identity, and that identity would have drove different decisions, different behaviors, different habits. You would have had a totally different result.
My whole life would have changed.
That was such a defining moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just like, I'm a little bit speechless, because I feel like that's when you can really unpack the defining moment in your life.
Sure.
And then everything that came good because of it. Now, you obviously from there, you've had tons of exits. You're building incredible businesses. But you also have a philanthropic arm that I think is important to talk about. I have a nonprofit as well, and so I love to share it on the show, because I think so often people are focused on the acquisition of things, of wealth, of the checkbox, of the exit. And I sadly feel, and I don't know if you agree, but I feel like people sometimes lose their way as they're trying to acquire things, and they sometimes miss the mark of what life's all about. Tell me a little bit about why you chose to do this and what your charity does.
Sure. Yeah, we all need a North Star. We all need something that drives us that's greater than us. Because at the end of us is still emptiness. It's still a lack of fulfillment. And I got to a place where I had the exits, I had the money, I had the houses, had the cars, and it's still emptiness. Like there's nothing fulfilling there. Your relationship, usually you've given up so much in your relationships, and so your relationships are broken, and there's casualties along the way because you've had to work so hard to get where you are. And then you look back in your life and you go, okay, I have all these things, but none of them matter. None of them bring me joy. There's no fulfillment in this. And for me, what became very fulfilling, which is a whole process of discovery for me, was really making an impact on someone else's life that couldn't impact it themselves. So I started off with orphanages and feeding centers in Honduras. And I was actually down there with a friend and saw in great need and just thought I could help here. And then all of a sudden I started to feel this spark of fulfillment, like, okay, this is pretty amazing. Like, this is awesome. And began to pour into that. Really, then that laddered into so many other things. And so now we have our foundation is called Impact Others. And Impact Others is really, it works in 4 areas. It does clean water. We dig wells and provide clean water. And we're in Africa and India and various other countries. All of my nonprofits work in about 108 countries now. We also do feeding centers and education centers. So many children they have a family unit, but they're still malnourished and they're undereducated. Thirdly, we do orphanages for kids that, have no one to care for them. And then lastly, we build sustainable businesses. We typically build the sustainable businesses in close proximity to these orphanages, feeding centers, or wells, because we can teach somebody business acumen, give them a leg up, and then we'll ask them to contribute some of their profitability back to that to create an ecosystem. So we've built, I think, 17 or 18 sustainable businesses. And that's one of my favorite things, because it's like when you get to take what you love and you get to impart it into someone else. And it's just amazing. One quick story, we're in northern Pakistan right now, freeing slaves. In Pakistan, they have what's called a debtor's prison. If you take a loan and you don't repay it, you get put in prison, and then you have to work it off. But the system is rigged against you in that you'll never work it off, and your family has to come with you. So to prison. Yeah. And it's not like a normal prison. What it is it's typically put out, like, for instance, the one that we just were working at is a brick factory in northern Pakistan. They'll live on site at the brick factory, really poor conditions. All family members work. So one of the families we recently freed was a husband, wife, and 6 children. All of them were enslaved. But the crazy part is they've been enslaved for 4 generations. You never get out of it because you can never repay it. So it wasn't him. It wasn't the father that made the bad choice. It was a great grandfather, right? And so now his children are enslaved, and he's got 6 children there. And the slave owner is happy for them to have as many children as they want, because he's just building a bigger. So there's 700 enslaved people at just this one brick factory. They'll never get out of it. And so we will go in and pay the debt. And then we'll take them. It's just like in early U.S., the Emancipation Proclamation went out, and 70% of the slaves decided, I'm just going to stay with my slave owner because I don't know what else to do, right? Like, how am I supposed to earn a living? And so we bought him a motorcycle taxi, taught him how to basically do business. We bought her a sewing machine. We actually have an entire sewing facility there where we teach women to sew, get them out of slavery, teach them a trade. And we freed, I think, 19 or so people now, and then all of their family members come with them. And it's pretty incredible. And so we're actually taking a whole TV crew over there this month, and going to go check all that out. But yeah, that it's just, to me, that is where fulfillment comes. Like, I would rather do that than anything else on the planet. And now I'm actually building businesses again for the purpose of just being able to give back more.
Well, okay, you just teed into my question, because I was like, obviously, even losing 30 million, you have made far, far more than that. And I don't know how much you get into, but you talked about a really massive exit. You could decide tomorrow to never work another day. You don't have to do the events that you're doing. You don't have to do Empire. You don't have to do anything that you're doing, but you still are. And not just a little thing, like you're doing a lot. Right. Where does that drive come from? What makes you still want to contribute and build and grow at such high levels?
Yeah. I love business, first of all. Like, I am a little bit of a junkie, I'll admit that. But you can't have that many businesses and not be somewhat attracted to it. But for me, in 2019, I sold 76 companies all in 1 year. Biggest exit year I've had, and really was just getting into this kind of philanthropic place. And the crazy part is you could sell a company for $1 billion and go out and decide, I'm going to do good in the world, and realize there's way more than $1 billion worth of need in the world. And that's where I found myself, was I'm out in the world and we're doing all these things. And, my partners in this, there's never enough capital for the need that surrounds you. Right now we feed and educate, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,300 children a day. And I want to get to 10,000 this year. It's like, and it's never ending. And the thing is, you could say, well, I want to do 100,000, and they're already there waiting on you. And so for me, it's like, I find business to be a science today. I don't have a lot of stress with business anymore. I don't feel the strains of being a young entrepreneur as much anymore. And so because the stress of business, a lot of it has gone away, it becomes a fun tool for me to just continue to exponentially, be able to do more in the world. And now we've launched this big Aspire Tour, and we're doing Aspire Tour all across the country. And I literally start off every morning, 5,000-6,000 entrepreneurs. And all I do is I say this very thing is like, hey, look, I could teach you a tool today that teaches you how to turn your business into a $1 million, multi-million-dollar empire. But if you get to the end of this and it's all about you, right, you're empty, just like me, because I've ended up empty, And so it's very much innate in who I am. And when you get that fulfillment, it's like you with your nonprofit, you do that. It's like, once you do it, it's so hard to find that same fulfillment in anything else in life.
It's so true. And I think until you're able to get to that place, and I always say too, you don't need to wait to have the big exits.
No.
Like, if you don't have money, you have time. Go volunteer your time at an organization. And if you don't have time, you have money.
Sure.
And if you don't have either, you don't have priorities.
Right. That's right.
So it's like, you should be able to get involved. But I truly believe that same thing. And I just think we have a similar ethos in that regard, that you will feel better. And personally, I will run harder and farther and outlast anybody if I'm doing it for someone else.
Yeah, that North Star provides so much, so much effort and energy into everything else you do.
Yeah, so good. Oh my gosh, I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I want to be respectful of your time and just thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
I genuinely have enjoyed this conversation, so just thank you so much. I always ask a signature question at the end, and it's basically this: if you woke up tomorrow, every dollar in your bank account, your houses, your businesses, everything is gone. The only thing you get to keep is the information that you've built along the way. But you've got a mortgage, you've got to put food on the table for the boys. What are some of the first things you would start to do tomorrow? Now, nobody knows your name. They're not going to pick up your call.
Sure.
What would you start to do tomorrow to start to build it all back?
Yeah. For me, I would find a job that I could perform in that would give me enough capital to then go invest and build businesses again. My belief, my philosophy is build community. In that community, serve the community with products and services. And in that, you'll never lack for clients. So I would have to find a way I'd go find a sales job. I'd find a way to make capital. But in that, I would also then start building a community of some kind, right? And that's how I've built all of my businesses, whether it's Think Realty or AAPL or Aspire or any of the other ones I've built. Community. Then you do enough data science on that community, you'll understand what they need, and you build products and services that they desire. Then you don't have to convince them to buy it. They literally are moving a line item on their P&L. It's like, oh, I like you, I'll buy you instead of buying them. They've already spent the money. And so for me, that's how I build my businesses, and that's how I would build the entire empire again.
I love that. And because I know so many people that will give comments, they'll say, well, okay, I want to do that, but how do I do that?
Sure.
So if you were going to start to build a community tomorrow, and then you wanted to identify the data, how would you start to do that?
Sure. Well, first of all, you build a community around what you know, and you begin to give to people that desire what you know. So what I would do, I know business, I know real estate. I'd probably build a real estate community, or I'd build a business community. It's what I know. And I would just give, and I would give, and I would give, and I'd have a podcast, and I'd have social, and I would have newsletters, and I would just do everything I could to give to collect people, right? And in collecting people, then if I didn't have a sophisticated way, right now you can go buy data on those people for 6 cents a record and figure out everything that you need to know in their life about what they spend their money on. And it's wild, the data you can get. Yeah. But let's say you want to do it more organically. Then you would just poll them in a very kind way. What do you need? What do you spend your money on? How do you use this? And you'd get to know that community by serving them. And then in that, you would pick the one thing that you believe that you could do better or serve them in a greater way. right? Or you find the blue ocean opportunity in there every once in a while that nobody else is touching.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that.
we have a community right now, and one of the big issues, like my partner and I, we're probably going to build a big CPA firm because small businesses really struggle to find CPAs that understand what they need.
Yeah.
And so we've looked at it. Our data says, you know, we could easily pick up 2,000 to 3,000 businesses just like that in a CPA firm if we build it. You know, it's like, well, that's an option for me.
I love that. I love that too. And I think even when you're small, if you don't have all of this information, like ask them.
Absolutely.
If you have it's easy if you only have a handful.
If you serve them, they'll tell you.
That's right. Just ask them. So thank you so much for this. I really genuinely appreciate not just your time, but what you're doing in the world and how many things that you're involved in and how you're helping entrepreneurs. Please let everyone know, like, how can they find more about you, what you're doing, and just engage with you more?
One of my business partners, Dan Fleischman, he's asked me Dan pushed me hard this year to answer all my own personal social.
Oh my goodness.
So I spend a lot of time. Eddie Wilson Official is Instagram, TikTok, all the things. And I still actually this year, at least for this year, I'm going to answer all of the DMs and all that stuff. So if somebody wants to connect, that's the best way to connect.
Awesome. So on Instagram, and then website for?
It's officialew.com.
Awesome. Thank you again for doing this and spending your time. It was great to talk to you.
Appreciate it.